Have you ever wondered that if somebody doesn't come through and help me, there's no chance I'm going to get out of this? Well, on today's show, we'll talk about some students and some stories where people were just that desperate.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome everybody to our show with Urban Youth Excel. My name is Dowie Kabata, and today I have with me,
I am Anthony Hall. I am his partner.
and we are both community collaborators with Urban Youth Excel. Our mission statement is simple and straightforward. Our goal is to partner with Jesus to mentor inner city students in every area of life. In every show we have, we're going to discuss how we do that, in what ways we do that, who we partner with, what students we're serving, and helping you guys to see the work that we're doing. So, Anthony, how have you had a chance to mentor some inner city students in these last few weeks and show them what Jesus looks like in action?
I have been blessed. God has given me several opportunities, but I would like to address one particular opportunity where I got to speak into a young gentleman's life, where he actually opened up to us to when we were with AZ Reach and we were partnering, and he was opening up, and he said, he was like, we would call him, he had a nickname that was attached to his father. And so with this, he came in one day and he was like, don't call me that nickname anymore. Call me by my real name. Call me by my real name. And we were like, oh, okay, why? And he was like, because my father has not been around. My father was nowhere around. And so I don't see why I should have that nickname that attaches me to him when he has not been in my life at all. And we were like, oh, and we was like, what made you come up with that decision? What, that's a huge choice to make in your life. And he was like, well, I sat down after having conversations with you guys, with me and a couple other gentlemen that are part with AZ Reach and Dawi. And so he had a conversation with us, and he's like, and I went back and I prayed on it. And he was like, I wanted to see where God would lead me in this choice. And we were like, oh, and then we was like, so you went to God? And he was like, yeah, as we've been talking and you guys expressed how we should go to God for all our decisions, all our choices, that's so what I decided to do. I see you guys pray and go to God for when you guys make decisions. So I chose to do the same. And it allowed for him to be able to make a choice in his life that is a part of his identity, to go from going by the nickname that he went by to going by just his original name. That in itself, even in the Bible, God gave somebody a name when they had great changes in their lives. They went from one name to another name. And so this was a biblical decision that he had to make. So that was an opportunity where God allowed for me to pour into a young man's life and show him how God moves, and then to see him make choices in reflection of it.
Good, that's great. So for our viewers who may have not caught the last episode, our organization is called Urban Youth Excel, and one of the things that we do well is we want to partner and collaborate with other organizations that are also working to help the students in our inner city high school system. Anthony had just mentioned AZ Reach. That is one of our partners, and that was where Anthony was able to do this great work with the student to sort of encourage his identity about who God has made him, and that situations that have occurred in his past don't actually define him. And for many of our students, they're kind of held back by certain situations they've gone through. And part of our work is to say, those things don't define you. What defines you are the choices you make today. And no better of a choice could you make than to walk with God in a really close way. One of the ways that I've had a chance to embody and live into our mission is with a student that I got to meet a little bit ago. And one of the ways that our work has really benefited our students is that when administrations in certain high schools see the work that we're doing, see the benefit it's making, how students come in and hang out with us, and after a couple months, they're better in education, they're better at homes, they're better in their communities, they're walking with God in a tighter way. Administration will then say, hey, we have this student that is going through some things. Hey, Mr. Anthony, as a community collaborator for UIE, would you mentor him? Hey, Dawit, as a community collaborator for UIE, would you mentor him? And there's one student in particular that I remember, one of the counselors at the local high school who knows the work that we do says, hey, I have this gentleman I want you guys to meet. Brought the guy into the classroom. After a few minutes chatting with him, we realized that he did not live with his parents. He lived with his sister, that his situation at home was really severe, that there were moments where he's considering suicide because of the things that have occurred in his home, both the choices he's made and the choices that people have made against him. And, you know, in our work, there's certain moments where you have to kind of decide, how do we lean into loving Jesus well in some of these civic spaces? Because there's a dance you kind of have to have between the sacred space of what we want to do with God versus the civic space in the schools. And one of the ways with this student, we're able to kind of move him away to a different place, and we're able to pray for him. Pray that God would help him, God would serve him, and we've built relationships with him throughout this process. I'm a pastor at a local church here in Phoenix, Arizona. I was able to bring him to my church, mentor him, not just in the things that I say on campus, but he's able to see me do that work in my community. And this is just one really tangible and concrete way that we're able to serve him. And if you think about the impact we could all have if we wrapped our arms around our students, if everybody did what I did with a student, what Anthony did, what you viewing at home did, we could really change our community. And that's something that we want to see happen. One of the ways that we've done that in a really concrete way this month is that on all of our campuses, when we get together with these students, when we build relationships, we like to sort of mobilize that momentum into off-campus events where the sort of civic, sacred sort of boundary doesn't have to be a consideration at all. We actually take 20 to 30 high school students, 20 to 30 junior high school students. We've also built great relationships with local junior high schools in the Valley, and we'll take them off campus. We'll find a place where we can hang out. We get them the best food that we can, a bunch of pasta and cakes and cheesecakes and ice cream and cookies, you know, all the good things that the students would come to regardless of what's happening. So if anybody who deals with students or young people, you can feel what I'm saying. So we get all this great food, and then we get them into a space where we use these journals that we've made. As an organization, we have felt like there are students that we know who want to grow with God, who like what we have to say, but feel like the things of God are slightly inaccessible to them. They feel like the things of God are a little bit too confusing. They're a little bit, it's hard to comprehend. So we made these little journals that in our next broadcast, I will guarantee to our viewers, I will bring the journal. And it just has a few verses and a few questions, and a few verses and a few questions, and a few pictures. It's a little bit more of a digestible way to engage Jesus and to engage God's word. And so we get them to this hangout, and we get the journals out. We take a time to write. We take a time to eat. And this week, or this last couple weeks that we've had these hangouts, there's one story in particular that we spoke about. And it's a story that we mentioned all the way in the beginning. And it has to do with the issue of desperation. Anthony, can you think of just the issue of desperation as it relates to our high school students, just before we get into the event? When you hear the word desperation, Anthony, and you think of some of the students that we deal with, in what ways do you find them in desperate situations?
The beautiful thing about it is that with students and youth, a lot of things are in desperation. They feel they're in desperation just on what they want to wear in their outfits. And so, but the beautiful thing about those is that we get to sit down and we get to also elaborate on what desperation looks like, what desperation is, so that they're not stepping out the door in desperation 24/7. They're now being able to recognize, oh, this is a desperate moment. That is not a desperate moment. That's a moment where, yes, I'm stressed a little bit, but it's not where I gotta step into a place of desperation. But then you have other moments where, like with that student that changed his name, he was like, that is a desperate moment because it is desperation in essence of who I am as a person. And so he was able to recognize that. So our students, they have moments of desperation. And even with like what I had expressed in our previous podcast, where I discussed the gentleman where his life with desperation, where he had to move. And I heard his story where he moved. He had to literally lie and call the cops to have the cops come and remove him out of his parents' home so that his auntie could then take over custody of him. So he had to be in desperation to be able to get himself out of the situation that he was in, to put him in a better situation. He calls his aunt, he calls her mom, but that's who helped raise him. But to have that desperation, but he also to see how God allowed for him to be able to move in such a way and have people in place that allowed to be able to come and take over the role of mother, an aunt that took a role of mother to be able to put him in a position to be where he is currently today. So there's a lot of opportunities that God gives us to
With
show
a,
with desperation.
yeah, thank you for sharing that, Anthony. With a lot of our students, desperation and depression often go hand in hand. And especially with young people, when you get desperation and depression together, you get really terrible choices that often affect them for the rest of their lives. So for us at UIE, we want to ask, how can we engage the issues of desperation with Jesus? And the story that we addressed when we had all of them together for that good food, there's a brief Bible story where there's a woman who has an issue with bleeding. She has a medical condition and she hadn't been able to get help for her medical condition. It says that she spent all her money on every doctor that she knew. And there's a moment in the story in the Bible where Jesus sees her in her desperation and she reaches out and grabs Jesus. And when she grabs him, she's miraculously healed. And Jesus turns and looks at her and says, because you trusted in me, you received the healing that you were so desperately longing for. And when we turn from that story to our student lives, we had an opportunity for students to write in their own journals, in what way do you want God to sort of step in and heal you and rescue you from that super desperate situation like that woman was in, where she had spent all of her money. So many of our students find themselves in situations at home, in situations with friends, in situation with parents, where they feel like, Dowie, I've done everything I know to do. There's literally nothing left for me. Either I'm going to get kicked out, I'm going to fight somebody, I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret for the rest of my life. I need some deliverance. And so when we sat with students, we had them journal, and what we did is we broke them up into little groups where students could now communicate with their peers, which is another huge thing in our high schools, and we could have this conversation endlessly about isolation. A lot of our students who find themselves desperate and potentially depressed often isolate from one another and think, I'm the only person in the world that's struggling with this issue. So when we get together, we talk about the story of that woman, we have students write down, where in your life do you need God's hand to touch what you got going on? And they share with one another, and then we talk about it together and ask, how can God show up in your desperate moments and bring some deliverance, bring some healing? And for some of the students that we know, issues of suicide, unfortunately, is on the rise in many of our young people, whether it's related to social media and isolation and all the different things related to that, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Issues of suicide are something that we find prevalent amongst our high school students. And for one student in particular I'm thinking of, who had a desperate situation in his home because of a relationship he had with his sibling, there was a consideration of suicide. And one of the ways I've been able to help him, by looking at the story, by praying with him, by hanging out with him on the weekends, not just during the week at school, is I wanted to be Jesus's literal hands and feet in his life to say, don't do that. Don't hurt yourself. You have so much to offer. God has so much that he wants to do through you and in you, even if you can't see it. Let me be the mouth. Let me be the hands of God in the situation. Let me bring deliverance and healing to you. Let me pray for you. And we have endless stories we can share. But I began the broadcast by mentioning the issue of desperation, and I bring at this point to say, this is the situation for many of our students. And what Anthony and I want to do with UIE is say, how can we use God, and how can we let God use us to meet the moments of desperation that so many of our students have? And by God's grace, we've seen that deliverance. We've seen that transformation. We've seen students leave suicide and now become athletes and now join into different ways in their community. See students go from having F grades to encouraging them with their walk with God and now getting ready to graduate. We've seen all those major transformations, and many of them come through issues related to desperation. One more thing I wanted to talk about is that we at Urban Youth Excel have an annual fundraising event that we're going to host here in a couple of weeks. One of the things that makes us excited about that event is we know for many of you viewers, you're like, hey, we got these two adults talking on the screen. Where are these students at? The students you're talking about, can we see the tangible work you're doing in the changed lives of the students? And at our fundraising event, we actually select 10 or 12 of the students that we've worked with, and we train them and prep them to be able to go and share a little bit about what God has done in their lives through us and through our organization. And
Mhm.
yesterday, we had the sweet privilege
Yeah.
of having a dinner with 10 of the students we specifically selected to go with us into our annual fundraising event next month. Anthony, can you share any thoughts that come to mind when we had 10 beautiful, sweet faces with us yesterday for
Yes.
dinner to talk about the event that's coming up?
It was awesome. It was awesome because in the last podcast that we mentioned vans and being able to have to pick up some of these students and take them and drive them to and from the events. And in this instance, like we got to drive, and it was about an hour because some of them are spread far apart. But the beautiful thing about it was we got to go, we got to sit, and half the kids was like, "I never even heard of that place. Where are we eating? What are you talking about? I've never been there." And then we get there, and one of the gentlemen and the young lady were looking. They were like, "Whoa!" Like I saw in their eyes, like they were just first time ever being at an amusement park. They were like, "They have this,
That's
they
fun.
have that." They were so excited because it was something that they had never experienced before. So we had the opportunity to do that while we brought them together so that they could even meet each other because if they were from different schools, that they were able to come together and to actually meet someone else from another school, but in the same situation as they were. To be able to be trusted, we got to let them know and show our trust and our faith in them that they were there to be those select few kids. So it was awesome. And also afterwards, when we left, I went to my drop my kids. They were like, "No, there's a Ross. There's a Ross. Let's go over there first." So we ended up going over and doing more life with them, doing more life. Not just, oh, we went to eat. Afterwards, we went and some of the kids were shopping and things like that. But it was fun to see them to be relaxed, to enjoy life, to enjoy being kids. And then after that, then I went and dropped them off. We're listening to music, and they're telling me all of these crazy stories, of course, as you do. And but it was an amazing experience and opportunity to be able to pour in, have do life with these kids.
Yeah, thank you for that, Anthony. For the viewers, one thing I just never want you to lose sight of, and especially for our viewers who are adults, you know what it's like to be at that moment of desperation, where you
Mhm.
feel like that you're an inch away from the edge, and how often in our lives it's the littlest things that take us away from those moments of desperation. It's not always
Mhm.
a big extravagant thing. It's the tiny word from a friend that says, "I've always believed in you." It's the tiny hug from somebody you appreciate who says, "You got this." It's those little things that really keep students from going over the edge. And when we have this event, one of the things that Anthony and I really emphasized is that, hey, we deal with hundreds of students a week, thousands a month, multiple thousands throughout the year. We say hi, we say hey, we say, hang out with that we all love and care for. But there's only 10 of you here. And it wasn't an accident. It wasn't an accident that you 10 are at this exact place to have dinner with us. And for those of you wondering, we didn't even take them to nowhere crazy. It was a buffet. It was a nice buffet
Mhm.
because we had to pay for so many people. Nevertheless, it was still good. But when we sat down with them, we looked each one of them in the eye and said, "It doesn't matter what others have said about you. Me and Anthony chose you because we know God is going to do great things through you. You're here because you have gifts, because you have talents, because we see these great things in you. And whether or not you see them in yourself, we can say as adults, you got it." And it's those little words of encouragement that really turn a student away from making a decision that could potentially impact them for the rest of their life. So when we sit there and we're chatting, we're letting them know, hey, at our annual upcoming fundraiser, we're going to have folks who donate, folks who care for us. You're going to have an opportunity to network, to get to know them. But here's the real challenge we wanted to give to them is we want them to know this, is that when you get to that kind of a place at our annual fundraiser, can you tell people how God has really impacted you? And so we sat there and we actually had students write little notes in their phone that would say, what was life like before I knew God? One
Mhm.
question, write a little sentence. What was like once I met God, and how did Dawid and Anthony encourage me? One sentence. Where is life at now? One sentence. Where do I want to be in the future? One sentence. And what are Anthony and I doing? We're really giving them skills about presenting and presenting yourself. It's not just a Jesus thing we're doing here. However, when we share those questions with them and they answer them, we're going to help them learn to craft their testimony into 2 or 3 minutes so that they could share it with potential folks who are at the event that are wondering what's that work like. And here's the sweetest part of the event. I'm sorry, not at the event. The sweetest part of our discussion that we had yesterday at dinner is we actually got a chance to pause and say, hey, none of our stuff is refined, y'all. We're just kind of chatting. What did somebody put for question 1? What does your life like look before God? Boom, one student says, my life felt like it was gray. There was no color. Felt like I had no direction. I was just existing in the world. Another student, a gentleman, said, I tried to kill myself 3 times. And every time I got done with it, whether it was, we don't really have to talk about how it happened, but I woke up and I was mad that I was still here. We talked to another student who also said, I have situations in my family life that made me want to run away. And every student just naturally began to share. And we didn't even ask every student to share. You know, it can be difficult sometimes to get students to share vulnerable things. But because of the work Anthony and I had been doing, because of the space we created for them to share, each of them went around the table sharing these deep things they were going through. Then we asked, what was it like when Anthony and I jumped into your life? And to watch each one of these students that are coming from these desperate places look at us and say, once you guys pushed me towards God, it felt like there was color in my life now. It felt like things weren't just gray and black. Now things were lively and red. One student says, now I get up and actually want to go to school. I don't want to hurt myself anymore. Another student says, I got a better relationship with my parents. And I want to remind you guys, this is just us chatting about what we're going to do at the event, but the students saw it as a space where, you know what, I can just be vulnerable. I don't have to be isolated. I don't have to be alone. And students went on and on sharing about the things they had been through, about the ways Anthony and I had impacted them, about the future that they spoke of. Some of these students didn't know if they were going to have a future. And when we asked them about their future, you know what they're saying? I want to go to college. I want to get this trade. I want to serve my community in this way. And it was such a sweet reminder to Anthony and I about the work we were doing. Because one of the things that happens at this job is you realize you're not just teaching students. Students, whether they know it or not, are actually teaching you. They're encouraging you. They're showing you, hey, God can get you out of a desperate situation, even if I'm not asking, because I've seen what God does with them. Anthony, as we get near a close, is there anything else you want to share about that event, about that conversation we had with those students?
Well, you said that depression was tied and connected to that. And one of the students, the young lady that was there was like, I am no longer have that depression. I no longer walk in that. So it was a beautiful thing to hear that she was like, I started depressed and I am now past that, beyond that. I've moved away from that. Now my value, I have a higher value of myself. So it was just an amazing opportunity, one of opportunities that we get to receive with working at UIE. It's just a beautiful thing.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that, Anthony. Again, to our viewers, thank you again for tuning in with us on this broadcast today. We look forward to next time having some guests. Eventually, we'll get some students so you guys can know we're not just talking the talk, but we have some students to prove we walk the walk. Again, thank you guys for sharing your time with us. And until next time, have a good one.
Have a good one.